Thank you.
Over to you.
Today's topic about Spring Security. How can we use Spring Security in microservices? So before we start the Spring Security, we need to know about the security standard that Spring Security do provide. So basically, we basically have used Auth 2 into our code bases. Mostly, it's a popular language security standard. So what is Auth 2 does is basically allow the end user authorize a particular OAuth application and the OAuth client. That one application the user has logged in and he wanted to access another application which has the resources. So that is the OAuth server, and that on behalf of that particular OAuth user, using the OAuth client library, the user is actually access on behalf of the user the resources from the OAuth server. And this is like, in this case, it basically it protects the resources on behalf of the users. So user with the right credential able to allow that. And it basically has a different kind of grants, mostly to authorize code. And also it allows the client which can act on the behalf of the client credential on the behalf of the user. So basically, client credential, the ideal way, the right way of idea is that the client application is basically or was client accessing the protected resources with a limited set of protected resources or limited lifespan. As in the access token expand a certain amount of time. We know that what is the what authorization server does. It's basically issues after identifying the user, it's the client application. It issues a access token, and the access token has an expiry date, so it limits how much uh, on the behalf of time, maybe 1 hour, 2 hour, the client application can access the protected resources, which is basically uh, as long as that particular time is there, using the access token it can able to, in the particular time it can able to access it. Okay, so this is also have like authorization is granted to the client application after the client has been properly authenticated. So on the client behalf it's able to access those resources. So that credential is the implicit flow, and the resources one are password credential grant is another flow which we can also use at the point of time is just to access the particular resource. Okay, now there is like a OpenID commit. OpenID connect is basically extension which is on top of auth 2 that provide a authentication, and it's introduce a ID token. So basically in auth 2.0 what happened, you have a, like an access token, but here is a ID token. So you authenticate against the OpenID identity provider, and that particular identity provider return backs the ID token from the token endpoint, at least authorization code grant flow, and the client relies on the ID token to ultimately authenticate the user, which a client also call the relying party, because this relies on the ID token, right? And ultimately, the assertions or the claim that ID token contains to authenticate the user, because the assertion describe about the authentication that provider identity provider has provided at that particular moment of time. So relying party of the client application is depend on the ID token. So OpenID connect. Then we have the optional specification also there is OpenID connect, and then OpenID discovery. That is an optional. Is a provider uh, is open to OpenID connector. providers to support. Okay, opening. So basically, identity provider, OpenID identity provider is opening the OpenID Connect provider supports this. Then it exposes additional endpoint which provide a configuration metadata about the provider. In this, where I could find the authorization endpoint, a token endpoint, and JWK endpoint with the implicit grant support and the scope supported and so forth, right? Okay. Now, when we are also familiar about JWT token. JWT token is basically access token. It's on its own having all the information, all the assertions, all the claims that it has. So it has a self-containing access token format. It has a, like a header format, and then it has a, like a body format, and it also defines what are the different algorithm is used to sign this particular token, and also what is the algorithm used to encrypt that, etc. details are provided. Okay. So now if we see any kind of JWT site, right? JWT.io. Now here is a sample of access token has been provided, right? So this access token has a header part which says the which algorithm is basically used. What is the type of the token? It is JWT token. It is 256 hash encoding. Then it contains the payload data. It says about the user name, his ID, his subject ID, etc. So all these details are there. Then the verifying signature comes, which is base 64 encoded detail. Okay, so this is like a three-part JWT token look like a header, which is kind of about the payload that is used, algorithm that is used, then the actual payload containing that particular identity of that user. Then if you wanted to verify the signature, we can use the public JWT key to verify that. Now it's just a JSON payload, right? So JWT token is there, then JWT signature that is there to sign that particular token. So it can be secured. Then there is like JWE or JWT web encryption. We can encrypt the payload, etc. And then obviously there is like a public key, JWT web key, which is used for the encryption. Okay. And then basically the resource server is fetches the public key from the identity server to verify the signature and then grant the user the access. Now here we can go to this sample application structure, where application structure is very simple. Here we have one UI application, it going the authorization grant. So authorization server is a key cloak or open source authentication authorization service. So authorization grant, it will get a particular token, and then it's going to be either calling microservice A, microservice B, microservice B, you can call microservice C. So here the client application or UI application is representing the particular customer, and it is basically getting the JWT token as a part of the request to the client. And then they have like JWT client, so it can goes to the authorization server, ClickOff server, and try to validate that particular token, get the authorization can, and then that particular microservice allowed to access that particular application. Okay, so let's, and then you can also have, you also can use OpenID when you have using identity server, like for example your Google, Facebook, etc. social open identity server you can use, that you can also use in your code base. Okay, so that being there, let us look into the source code or sample code. Let us go through the code walkthrough, and then we can look into how we can configure or write our code. So here we're going to see the implementation of OAuth2, which will be passing the token from the backend to another service, and from that front-end to backend, and then backend to backend is also B is calling the C, which is going to be using client credential flow, and then in the same token can be used to call another service like E, F, G, like that. Okay, so let us look into the code base. Okay, so here we need to look into, there will be like different flow we can be exploring. One flow will be your UI application to service A, another UI application to service A to service B, then token relay from UI application to service A, then service B, or service B to service C. Token exchange, we're going to look into service A or B or B to C. Similarly, client credential on the UI application. Okay. So here you wanted to see that particular code. It is only about authentication user, not the authorization. Okay. Just a UI app calling a single resource or a server, or the application is calling two different resource server. A token exchange will be there, and then you're going to be see the client credential flow, where the particular, as per the diagram, it will call the service A and B, then service B will be using client credential to calling the service C. So it will be happening right like that. Okay. Let us go through the code base that is there. So here we have the auth server. So in the auth server, what we have is basically configuration, Jose, here is a key generation utility, auth server application. It is a Spring Boot application, right? Okay. So let us see what are the things we require if you wanted to create the auth server. First, let us look into our credential. So here you have basically you're going to have dependency management and Spring Boot and Java plugins we have had. Then we have starter web. Then we have Spring Boot starter security. And then for we're going to have like Spring Security Auth2 authorization server. So this application will act as authorization server as per our application flow. And there you can put your authorization server number. So these are the other dependency that is there. Now here it is nothing much out here. It's only the log level that you wanted to control and the server port where the server going to be running. So this is just a Spring Boot application. So simple, you just have a Spring Boot application that is going on. And then what you have this authorization server configuration. So what to authorization server configuration that we're going to be importing from the default import mode. And then we're going to be registering a client repository. Okay. So here basically when we register the client, we register them with a particular ID, then login client credential, client ID and client secret that we can read from a configuration and use that. Here the client authorization mode is a basic authorization mode. Okay. And then it has like authorization code or the authorization GAN type that is mentioned. And then after that, if it has been successfully authenticated, then it will be redirected application to the login client. So whenever that particular thing happened, and the scope here is used is a open ID. That is one client. The login client, that is for the your UI. Then you have like another client which is using authorization flow, and here it's going to be GAN type is basically having like a refresh token. It's going to have basic, and it's going to have like a flow A. Flow A is basically where the service A is being called. Okay. So whenever that particular request comes, service A would be called. So this will be used right here. And the client setting required user consent that is being there. And it using a different client ID and secret. So each client that you're going to be registering with your authentication server, you're going to have a different client ID and secret for that. Same for the flow B, when the service microservice A and B both are called, that will be there. Okay. And it will having like a scope of authority for the client A, that is microservice A will be called. Here you giving the scope of calling the both of the microservices A and B. Third combination is ABC. All three services can be called from this particular step. Here the specific scope has been defined. Now these things have been hard coded, but we can also use a UI to add this new client registry, store that into the database, and we can create the configuration on the fly or update the configuration as the case may be. So out here we have that. Then the last is only the your client C has been called. So scope define like what is the permission that particular client has. Okay, it has a permission or authorization to call this all-three microservice, single microservice, or this. And then it using in-memory register repository. It can also use the database-based repository that also be there. Now for encryption of JWT token, like we have seen, there is like a JSON web key. So here JSON web key set provider going to be called. That's additional B. So it just create a random RSA key, right? And with the random RSA key, this will return the JKS set or the key that is there. Now, based on this JWTK set provider, it will be JWT security and the security context from the provider it will get. So it just create JWT source security provider and the provider settings. What the provider setting contain? The auth server will be available. Who is the issuer of this particular access token? It will be this particular auth server on this particular endpoint. Okay. Now, if we come to the security config, here obviously we know the string uses security filter chain for doing any kind of filtration. So we are enable web security with enable web security that by default annotate and enable that. And then we have to put the default security filter chain like we have seen, or we know that we can enable CRF, or we can disable basic authentication, or we can disable the form authentication also. Okay. So out here it's just having like a form authentication enable. So it's a HTTP protocol. What happened? How going to be authorization request? It going to be authorization request. Any request need to be authenticated. So authorization request, here we have chosen any endpoint, but we can also, as we know, we can authenticate a single endpoint or etc. So far in the microservices, whatever we use, we just in that particular microservices, we mostly use to authenticate that particular user. A particular microservices is acting itself is a authorization server. But right now here, it's going to be relying. This is the authentication server, so it's going to control the other microservices will be using this to know whether that particular other microservices will come to here and know about the particular authentication that is currently there, and the access token is going to be validating, which will be issued by this particular server, and it's going to be using form login, and in the form login with defaults. So now we know that there is like a user detail service. Okay, so what is the by default user authentication that we can use to access the authentication server? So it just uses default username and password with the role user. It uses the in-memory detail user management server detail. So user detail kind of a like user detail provider can be a LDAP, can be a database, can be in memory. For the demo, it is just in memory. And here it uses a default password encoder. It's not uses anything else that we can also use. Now with the default options, whatever is there, that is by default, it's going to choose in from here. So out of this authorization configuration, what we have seen that there are different flows or different flow base or URL base. It registered a separate client and given a separate scope. Now also here what going to happen is the JKSW key is there, JWK key. So it's going to be generating key generation util that is there. Let's look into that. So key generation util will generate a secret key. So key generator get instance the HMAC SHA 256 algorithm it's going to use, and this key will be used to encode the access token. So it's going to generate a HMAC key and it's going to be returning the HMAC key wherever is required. Then it can also generate the RSA key pair. So you're going to use the algorithm RSA. Key pair will be initialized with the key size, and the key pair generation is so using that. Now generated EC key. So it's showing different flavors of key generation, and it basically generating the key based on different format or different algorithm. HMAC key is generated, okay, and it has also generated a key pair using RSA algorithm, and it also generated additional key with the additional algorithm that is there. It generated the key pair based on the algorithm EC. So now on the JKs, what they are doing, they're generating a RSA algorithm based key, a key pair rather, public and private key pair. And from this key pair, it getting the public key, RSA public key, and RSA private key. And then based on the public key, it's going to be generating the RSA key, and private key it has put here. And key ID is the random ID they have put, and they have generated that. Now where this particular service, and similarly it has like generate EC based keys or octet sequence key, etc. It has chosen. So different like secret key, right? HMAC key, etc. So if we need to generate the keys, out of here we can see this key generation has been used to generate a key set, JWC key sets, and that particular key set will be used to encrypt that particular access token that the authentication server will return. Okay. Now let us see that how the individual services looks like. Now here in the individual service, what you have is just have default Gradle plugin, Java management plugin, then the web security, and OAuth to resource servers. So these ABC are basically the resource servers. Okay. Now, as per our structure, what we have, the UI can initiate a call, which can individually can go to the either service A, service B, or it can go to the individual service A or service B, or it can go in a change of service calls B to C. Right. So now here, when you have seen that particular dependencies, right? Here we can see the authorization server has been added, right? And here in A, or the service that going to be, having the detail, it going to be always the resource service dependency that going to be added. So it can be a user profile service, it can be a product service, it can be a cart service, right? So for example, I wanted to build a assessment, right, for a student. So what are the services I need to know? I need to know who is the student is. I may wanted to know what is the student past historical data. I wanted to know what are the different questions are available on a certain knowledge base. Then I can also wanted to, you know, having certain business rule for the assessment service. So assessment service, or wanted to know who is the user, what is the knowledge base. Then for the particular token, so for the particular your subject, topic, subtopic, you wanted to find what are the assessments are there. It may have a business rule that it need to create a 20 question assessment. So then it's going to be query the table first 20 questions which user has no past history. It's going to create and it build a assessment and it return. So like this, all of these servers are our resource servers. Okay, so resource servers obviously need to connect to our authentication server because they're going to be getting the incoming key, and based on the incoming key they need to be knowing where the server is, right? So apart from the logging level and etc., what you need to mention that Spring Security OAuth 2, this is the resource server, and JWT, who has issued the JWT token. The issuer URL is this one, auth server, or you can say localhost 9000. So it's going to reach out to this auth server for validation. Now let's see. This is like another simple microservice, Spring Boot microservice. So that's there. Now what we're going to have, we're going to have some endpoints. Okay, service A controller. So service A controller is nothing but it's a service A. It has a gate mapping. So it's going to accepting the JWT authentication token or JWT authentication as to be separate request for body, etc., or parameter, whatever there. Now, this is a scenario when the A service is actually going to make a service call, another service call. Okay. So service call response is there, which going to be say what is the service name, where it make a call, etc., etc. Let's leave it. So this is a controller, and this controller need to be secure. So how this controller need to be secure? So resource server configuration, if we can go. So again, in another security filter chain that you have seen normally with Spring Security. So what is this using? It says MVC matcher. So MVC matcher, what the pattern is going to say? Service dash A star star. So any pinpoint that is starting with service dot A star star will come to this. And what is the how it going to be authorizing the request? So it's going to be authorization request by MVC matcher, have access. It must have an authority. We have, remember, we have added the scope authority A, but there we have not mentioned the scope. We only mention authority A. So like for example, if you mention some user as user, then we put role underscore user. Like here we have to put scope underscore authority A. So if the authority A is there, any request is need to be authorized like this. And then It's going to go to auth to resource servers, JWT, and HTTP build. That's there. So that's how it secure the particular endpoint. Now, similarly, we're going to see the services B and C going to be are same. It is just a resource service dependency, but along with the resource service dependency, like in our picture, A is not actually calling any other services. Okay, but B is actually calling microservice C. Okay, so if B is calling microservice C, then obviously in that case, what need to be happening? You need to make a call to the C, and obviously when I make a call to the C, you need to provide some kind of a what token to able to make a call. So out here, for apart from the Spring Web Security and resource server, it has OAuth to client, because this service is basically a client on behalf of the user, which is the UI application, which is acting in behalf of the user, is going to call the service C. So when you're going to call the service C, what happens? You need to add an additional endpoint OAuth to client. Okay, so that means it will be kind on behalf of the user. It's going to make a call to the another service. Okay, here it is use reactive framework, so it will be webflux, and the net is the underlying server that you're going to be using that. Now let's see the resources. Now here lots of other things are there. Now apart from the resource server specific, it get to know what is the issuer URI, right, where you're going to go and resolve that thing. Now it's going to be making call to the other services, right? Okay, so when you're going to make a call to the other service, so you need to say that which resource you're going to try to access. The services, service C. So service C is the normal name that they have given and the URI. So this is the another service that going to call using OAuth2 thing. Okay, fine. Now how going to make the call? What is the flow it's going to use? What is the grant type it's going to use? Finally, for securing this as a client, so client configuration, what is saying? Okay, this is my identity server or the identity provider, my auth server. Okay, fair enough. That's the issuer. Okay, and now out here you're going to say, hey, what scope I require to make a call to the client C. Okay, so I require, we have given in the some auth server the client ID and client secret along with the client type, right? So it's going to use the client credential to access this particular client C. So it's going to registering two kind of clients, and the scope will be authority C. Now here it is using client C exchange, where authority GAN type is nothing but JWT bearer token. So what is the exchange? So basically here the two things are happening. So UI application get a authorization grant flow, right? So it has a JWT token. It pass the JWT token. So it's going to simply going to pass on the same JWT token to microservice C. Okay. So it's going to just delay that particular same JWT token. It's not going to get a new JWT token. The scope, secret, etc. remain the same. Only thing a change, what is the authorization GAN type? Out here, it will be client initial. So here in the client C, it's going to make a call to the authorization server, get a new token, make a call, get the value back, return the value back to the container. Here rather you're going to say, okay, I have parameter auth GAN type. Here it is JWT bearer token. So the same bearer token will be forwarded there. That's the difference between the two mode. Okay. Now out here, what are the codes? What are the configuration will be? Okay. So again, a Spring Boot application, it has enable configuration property server config. Okay, so services config. So that's configuration property, etc. I'm going to be reading. Okay, okay. So out here, what is say? Configuration property is reading for OAuth to resource. So from here, it's going to be reading the custom property OAuth to resource. So it's going to be reading that. If it be in the properties file, then OAuth to resources, then there is service, service C, then URI. So it will read that particular piece, right? So this is like a custom part of it. So that value it's reading out here. Okay, we're going to come back to that. Now this is server configuration, same as before. If it has been B, then it should have a scope of authority B. If all requests are authenticated, and then the resource servers token going to use or to client with default values that are there. Now, what is the web client? Web client, we know it's basically used to make a call to another endpoint in a web flux. Fair enough. So what is the web client going to do? Okay. So here it uses the OAuth 2 authorization client manager. So sublet OAuth 2 authorization client exchange filter function, where it's going to be use the authorization manager, and it's going to apply to this OAuth 2 client configuration. So where is the OAuth 2 client configuration is mentioned? Here it is mentioned. It's just using authorization client manager, etc. So this value, let me create a new web client. I can inject the web client. I can make a call to other services. Okay. Maybe we need to just first look into the services config, then we're going to come back to it. Now, out here, what you have is the services config, multiple services it can call. So get services is now returning only this service. Okay, that's a map. And now that's another map, which is basically set or construct that. Now get config service ID. So whenever the service ID comes, it go through the particular map stream. You're going to find the ignore case, the what is the service ID, and then from that it's going to be returning a value. That is a service config object it's returning. So what is the service config object? It is services config, and there is like an inner class like service config. What is it having? It only having the URI. Okay. So by default, what happen is the configuration property is there. So from the configuration property itself, this value get populated. So auth to resources, then services. So they mean auth to resources services. This is the service ID, and this is the URI. So from here, we only getting the URI part being saved. Okay, because out here in the configuration, you have like service C is a key, and then this is the value. So here in the service configuration, this automatically takes service C, and here is the service object of the URI to exist. So it just return the get config. Fair enough. Now here, now let's see, is the get config is called from anywhere? Okay, so it has been called from out here, abstract flow controller. That's just an abstract class. So here is a service client object has been injected, an abstract flow configuration, and the service config is also injected. And then based on this is going to be making a call to the service C, and the response will be written back. Then you have like a controller, which is from service is going to be returning the data. Then there is like a token exchange that going to happen, and the service call response object that is returned, which is going to be returning all of that. Now let's go back to the web client configuration. Now this web client configuration obviously recording auth to authorization client manager, right? So it's just having like auth to configuration. Okay, auth to client. Now if we go back to the our configuration, now out here in the configuration, we have auth to client cert there, right? Two client has been registered. One is this, and the one is this. So based on that particular clients, it's going to be use the client exchange filter function. Now next you have the authorization client manager, the auth to authorization client manager that has been created out here, and it is growing inside that. So what it has? It has a client registration repository and auth to authorization client registration repository. So here it just uses the builder. It calls the client connection, GWT bearer auth to authorization client credential. That's what is going to be used, GWT bearer token. And then when it's create the authorized client manager, it uses default one with the client registry and authorization client registry. Then the provider has been added, and then it also has a context attribute mapper that is coming below, which is if the authorization request principal is the instance of GWT authentication token, then from that particular provider, they're going to get GWT attribute name. Okay. And then they're going to be getting from the principal the JWT token and actual JWT token they're going to be get. So JWT attribute value will be the actual token. So that will be there. So authorization client managers having all the client information, that is the configuration have, and based on that, it's going to be making the calls. So any questions so far? Hello.
No, sir.
Okay. Now Let's look into this. So the flow type is a token exchange. Okay. So here what is happening is from here the same token has been used. GWT authentication token that is there and the request. And then it's basically making a call to the service C, right? So how is going to be a client registration ID is using as client exchange token. So let's see how the service C is written out here. So service C is coming from the abstract controller, which has been extended from this class. So how the service C is called? Now you have the client registration ID. So we have in this class what you have the web client and you have the services config. So web client already has the GWT token. It has extracted and put it into its context. And also we are looking into the services config. That is we have put at the end of the our configuration. So what are the different services are there, right? So now out here when you're making the call, so here the web client from the service config getting the URI. What URI is getting? Is getting the URI from the configuration. This URI it going to be calling. So when you get to making this particular call, it's saying that attribute client registration ID. So client registration IDs. So this client registration IDs are coming from here. And here the client registration ID going to be getting servlet auth to client authorization extend filter function. So where you have seen this? We have seen this from here. Okay. So it's going to call and get that particular based on client ID, it's going to getting that, right? And this is nothing but it holding inside the authorization client manager, this one. So what this authorization client manager is doing is again having like JWT authorization client provider, fair enough. Then it has the authorization client repository that you can see what are the different clients are there. Their clients repository is these two type of clients are being registered in the configuration. So when these two type of client are registered, they are coming here. So the repository is coming from here. Authorization client repository and the client registration repository both are been there, both are been passed. And the context attribute mapper having the JWT token being mapped out here. Authorization client provider has been used. Okay. Now here we coming to the exchange and again going back. Okay. And then it calling this method client registration ID. So basically what is doing is putting the client registration ID into its map of attribute, that is it's going to be authorized client. So it's going to be using this to make a call and then it will be successfully able to retrieve the response whatever is returned. From B service, straightforward is the service call. They are saying that okay, this is B service, the request URI is this, the token is this, that from the token the ID, subject, audience, authorities, grant authorities, whatever the scope was mentioned, those are mentioned out here. And the service call responses are also being added. And normally, if we don't have calling the service C, there are two options of calling the service C, but it's just providing the client registration ID. In one case, we are just sending the token, right? So the same token that we received in this particular service. So now if you see this method call, so this method call is basically token relay. This is basically relaying the token. Whatever token it gets, the same token is passed along. And when is the actual call is being made, it getting the client config URI. So from that it gets the URI. And just like the token relay, it's just putting the header, the same client token that is there, it putting that here, and then making a service call to C. So there are two way of making the call we can see. One is the same token that has been sent from the UI, that is it got from the authorization server, sent to B. B just get that particular token from its header and pass that to the C. And everybody has a resource service, so they can authenticate that particular token like this. So it is basically the between microservice to microservice call, the token has been relayed. The same token has been followed from the client. Now another option that you can see out here, instead of depending on the same token, we are depending on the register client. Okay, it is the token exchange. Now when the token exchange happen, what happening? Actually, when the web client is making the call, now it is using the client credential C exchange. Now if we again go back to the exchange part of it, this the GAN type is a JWT bearer type, and the other type is basically the client credential one. So that's the basic difference that you can see, whether a new token has been created and that has been exchanged to the another service, or the token has been relayed. Okay, and resource server configuration that is there, that is basically doing the all the scope check against the your JWT provider that you have already mentioned, who is the JWT issuer server. Now obviously we need to go to the JWT issuer server to check that, right? So here we can see the bearer token authorization client provider. That client provider we have seen out here in the web client config. Okay, JWT bearer or to authorization client provider. So how this class is working? So this class is getting what? This is getting the authorization context, and it's going to be authorizing the user. So context, first of all, need to be there. So from the context is getting the client registration detail, and then is checking whether the JWT bearer GAN type is the type that is there. If it is they are not matching, then it's returning null. There is no authorization client that is returning. Otherwise, they are coming, they are getting attribute name, you get the JWT token. The JWT token is blank, you return null. Otherwise, from the context, it getting the authorization client. And then from the authorization client, it is also now checking whether the it try to get a access token. Access token from where, or the client is already authorized, but the access token is not expired, then no need to reauthorization. Okay. So now here GAN request, bearer GAN request, it is sending the request to the actual server. So token client get token response, JWT bearer request, and JWT this, and then it getting the token response. From the token response, it getting the principal.name and from the token response is getting the access token. So by this, when the client going to make a call, it's going to get a new exchange with the authorization server, and it's going to get a new exchange token. Based on that, it's going to make a call. So if we just can quickly recap, what are the different flows that are involved out here? Okay. So here, um, sorry, here we have like an authorization server that we can create, or we can depend on other third-party authorization server or OpenID based authenticate ID identity provider. So the client or the relying party make a authorization grant call and get a JWT token. Now it can exchange the token with the microservice A. Where the microservice A is not calling any other services, then what it's going to do, it's going to include a your resource server dependency. It's going to exchange the token by default. And here is this authorization server. We have registered different microservices as clients with different client ID and secrets. Those client ID secrets and the scope has been mapped. So if this particular token has a scope of service A, then this service A will be called. Now that's a normal flow, right? What to flow. Now here, when the multiple services are in play, right, there can be two things. One is whatever token is passed, this has been authorized. Now this token can be further relay sent without creating a new token. It can be further relayed to this particular service. Okay, so that is known as token relay. So what you're going to do, it's going to form the request header, it's going to get the token, and going to add it to its own request header and make a call. Get the response, return it back. Okay, and the authorization has been already done. So that's been one. Then there is a token exchange. So apart from it getting a JWT token, validate its own endpoint and the token, it's going to make a implicit client call with a client ID, because inside that what it's going to be now having is a registration of what two client IDs, and then one client ID is registered as a what to JWT bearer token. So in that case, a new token will be fetched, and that token will be exchanged, and that will be validated and authorized, and then the response will be there. So the relay, just like pass the token around, exchange, get a new token, make a call, get the response back, and return it back. Normal JWT to flow is like this. And in an authorization server, there are different algorithm you can use to create a sign key, public and private key pair, with which you can validate that. And here you're going to be using the client ID and secret to getting a new token. So any question on this flows?
No, sir.
Okay. So basically what do you understand was to wise resource owner. Who is the resource owner? That is the some identity of person who holds a resource. Then the client. What is the client application? Here's the UI app is the client application which on behalf of that particular user making a call. Okay. Then what is the resource server? That has some resource that owner wanted to access, which is authorized. Who going to be authorizing the owner, or from which server? Is the authorization server. Okay. And that's how the walkthrough flow works.
Sir, From the key cloak, we can do the authorization and like the mapping for the what different kind of roles can we do there?
Yeah, the scope is where that particular thing is there. Scope actually allows. So we have used the in memory, right? Different client, what is the client can do. But the user going to be authenticate himself, because in this server we have seen there is a in memory user detail service. So it has a, like a login form. So when the user is come here, if it's not authenticated, it's going to go here, it's going to authenticate itself. So here it is in memory. It can be also coming from a database, it can also coming from a LDAP server, Active Directory, etc. Okay, what is that? Actual user identity. So when the actual user identity has been established, that is fine.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then that user authorization or grant types can be also be done. But along with that, the clients here, the what are the clients? The UI app is a client on behalf of the user. Microservice B is a client. The microservice C on behalf of that particular user, right?
Hmm.
Now those clients also be registered with the servers, and they are registered with a client ID and client secret, which is unique for all these clients, all the microservice and the UI application. But UI application is basically authorizing. So here the user is entering his username and password to authorize itself. But if those client secrets are there, then it can check the validity of the GWT token. Okay, against that.
Okay.
Okay. Now there are different flows that we have seen. One is the authorization flow, right, where the user is explicitly authorizing it. Okay, or where it is been testing by the client credentials. Okay, so resource owner, client flow, client credential flow. Okay, so those are the different flows that is there. So client credential here, the clients are going to be having a client ID and secret. With that, they're going to themselves going to get a token. Like here in the client exchange, what happened? This is the client for service B. It has a client ID, client secret. It exchange that and get a token. So what happened out here? Out here, the client ID and client token has been shared across to the authorization server, and a token has been exchanged from OAuth token endpoint, and that particular token endpoint give you an access token which will be expired, and then using that you can now call another service. That is one flow. That is the client credential flow. Okay. So if the client here is a microservice, then we should be using that. If the client is a web application, like is the UI app application, in that case, what we going to be the authorization code flow. Okay. So in authorization code flow, what going to be happening? The user will click the login like normal regular application. It's going to take it to the authorization URL endpoint of the authorization server. Okay, user going to be putting his login form. User going to put his own username and password. Okay, then redirect the user back to a code endpoint. Right, it's going to return an authorization code. Then that particular authorization code will be exchanged using a token, and then the client ID and client secret will be exchanged, and based on that you get a token, you get a refresh token, etc., and you can make a call. Okay, that is authorization code flow. Okay, so for single page application, what we basically use, we use some sort of SDK, right? And then we basically use authorization code flow, where there is not directly a particular authentication token is written. First, a code is written, and then application make a call to it, and then it gets a API access token and refresh token. Refresh token is used to get a new access token, and then it can make a call to the backend services. Okay, so you have understood the difference between authorization code flow and the client flow, right? Client credential flow, where there is no user is involved. So for in case of a microservice, there is no user is involved. User is not entering his username and password. You have a set of ID and key, the same ID key out here, ID and secret. You exchange that, you get a token. Okay, so that's a particular flow. Okay, any other questions out here?
No questions.
Okay, then we can end the session for now. Thank you guys for giving us your time.